there are many levels of guilt with Gaza. So even thinking about how do I respond to the things I've seen feels indulgent because, right now there's a 10-year-old girl in Gaza who has not been allowed to leave for 640 days. It was very unsettling for me, Sean, to see that particularly in children around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, when those children a year and a half ago looked in their parents' eyes and realised their mum or dad could no longer protect them. That is a horrifying thing for a kid and also for a parent to realise, I've lost the ability to protect you. There's a lot of guilt in Gaza. There's guilt in leaving, there's guilt in having a square meal, there's guilt in putting a pillow over my head at 1 o'clock in the morning because I just need to sleep for 3 hours because there's a bombardment outside. I'm very frustrated for Palestinians on the ground who just see their rights being blown up literally day in, day out. And the lines that no civilians are targeted. I mean, this would be laughable or ludicrous in the same way that having the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, having one site meant to serving 2.2 million people and having people having to walk through a militarised zone, and when they are shot, the justification being, well, it's a militarised zone. I mean, if that wasn't the most ludicrous, lethal catch-22, it would be laughable.
James Elder, welcome to PoliticsJOE.
Thanks, Sean, very much.
For anyone who isn't familiar with you and what you do, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, that's kind. So I'm UNICEF's global spokesperson. So in the most simple sense, my job for the UN Children's Fund, which is the biggest agency for children around the world, is really to go to war zones or where there's been a climate crisis and talk to those people affected, mums, children, focus there, and to try and relay their stories. So to try and share, those people who don't have a voice, to try and share what's happening to them, to try and give a sense of how much they are doing to protect each other, their community, despite all the odds against them, and speak to what UNICEF is doing. And in a current environment of, unprecedented cuts to an aid sector, also speak about the impact of what that is doing for children and how dangerous that is for those families doing so much without support and now seeing that support ripped away. So in the most simple sense, Sean, to speak, share other people's stories.
And most recently, you have been in Gaza. Is it right? You've been there 5 times since October 2023.
That's right.
Right. What is the purpose of your work in Gaza?
It's been a different one. I noticed it was a different one myself because most places I go to, my aim is 50% of it is to share other people's stories and 50% is to speak to what UNICEF does, what we do and what we would do more of. UNICEF's mandate's very broad, right? We're doing nutrition, water, child protection, trauma, education. Gaza was very, very different because international journalists have been banned and because there was this, truth was the first casualty of that war. And also because I was there just a few weeks after the horrors of October 7. I've done this for 20 years. I've never seen that level of attacks on children. I've never walked into hospitals where I walk over boys and girls with missing limbs. And doctors, despite running around everywhere, I'm seeing not 1 or 2, but scores of children with horrendous injuries, Sean. And I've done this for a long time, but I still hadn't seen, not to the scale, what shrapnel does to a child's body. It's designed to rip through your bookshelf and cement. I didn't know there were 4th-degree burns. So seeing all of this and seeing what I was really realizing too was just this level of impunity, that this was not at scale. There was nothing proportional about these attacks. It became very clear to me very quickly that my job was much beyond talking about what UNICEF's doing, what we need to do. It was to try and bear witness to this, to try and create some sense for people to understand just how grave this is. It is, as UNICEF called it, a war on children. We didn't do that for a headline. We do that because the disproportionate number of children being killed, and that was late 2023. It's pretty hard work to go back and to see it continually deteriorating. As I say to people, what was different? Several things were different this time. One of the things, Sean, was different this time was not only was I again seeing hospitals full of children with those wounds of war, I was hearing those girls and boys because there's such a shocking denial of medicines and painkillers. You didn't just see a child who'd had quadcopter being shot in the head or a tank shells from shrapnel. You heard them as well because they're in immense horrific pain.
And this is to it's medical aid, but it's also food aid is one of the major issues in Gaza at the moment, where I think it's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has kind of taken over the distribution of aid there rather than it being UN or Red Crescent, Red Cross systems. Why why is it important for international organizations to have a presence in Gaza rather than it being run by this? I mean, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is an Israeli American kind of joint
Yeah.
project. Why is it important for international organizations like
Gosh, mate,
UNICEF?
so there's so many reasons. I'll start with the one you can picture most. So, um, during the ceasefire, when we really started making a difference, you see malnutrition go down, you see access to water go down, go up, you see medicines increase. During that ceasefire, there were 400 distribution points, right, across the Gaza Strip.
Mm.
At its core, humanitarian aid is two things. One is to go where people need it, and the other is to make sure you're looking at your evidence that the humanitarian aid you're bringing in is changing the game. So 400 distribution sites. Now that you and I are speaking, there's one GHF site. So that alone would just be like, well, hang on, this is ridiculous. But it is being used to try and sideline a humanitarian system that's didn't just work 2 months ago in Gaza, but works in Sudan, Ethiopia, Ukraine. It works the world over. So I've had, journalists who are almost exasperated, Sean, say, but come on, look, it's obviously there for good now. Can't you go to help it? Well, there's a couple of things. One is that, again, 400 distribution sites, there's no reason for this to be sidelined, except there are very clear statements made by Israeli officials that there is an aim to push a population south. So it's using aid as bait. You can't support that. Obviously, one distribution site, you're talking about the elderly, you're talking about the wounded, you're talking about kids, you're talking about single mums. You can't walk 30 miles to get your food. So there's that. Beyond all of these, and we shouldn't have to go beyond any of those, is it's in a militarized zone. So humanitarian aid has to be in a deconflicted site. You can't ask people to walk through a militarized zone to get to food. That's what's been done. And as we've now seen, 15, 20 examples where people are walking on that small channel and they are being, the IDF has had multiple occasions when they've been shooting people. I've spoken to at least 20 people who spoke to going to these sites, Sean, being corralled into like a cage, quadcopter above. As one guy said, we did nothing wrong. I just sat there and suddenly people were being shot from a quadcopter. Why did they do this, James? I've spoken to children who've been killed at these sites. I can speak to that. So I've never seen something so clearly where, on principle, it doesn't work. You need more distribution sites. You can't ask people to walk through a militarized zone. What about the elderly? I've held elderly in tears. But then to see it in practice, it is so much more damaging than I ever imagined. Not just because people are being killed there, not just because it's not serving the most vulnerable population, but because it is deliberately trying to sideline a humanitarian system that is multiple agencies, 400 sites. Humanitarian aid is not just food in a box. It's incubators, it's hygiene kits for girls, it's tents, it's oxygen. So it's one of the most dangerous things I've seen. And I guess my last point, Sean, is that it's a worrying precedent. You'll suddenly see armies and wars around the world where people realize, oh, we don't need the UN. We choose who gets aid and we just do it from here. That should be horrifying for people if we look at the way war is descending.
I'm not asking you to speculate, but I'm just wondering why it would be a goal of Israel, sponsored by America, to kind of have control over the aid system. And also, as you said, just having one aid site, having to navigate a militarized zone to get there. What would be the benefit to the Israelis to kind of have monopoly over the aid system in Gaza at this moment in time?
Well, this is the terrifying thing or the revealing thing, Sean, because I don't, barely anything I say is an opinion. It's based on my eyes on the ground and 5 times. It's based on endless conversations with people on the ground. And in this answer, it's based on statements made by Israeli officials, that ambition to push a population to the south. That's why we've heard from the highest levels of the United Nations, you cannot use humanitarian aid as a bait to draw a population to the south. So they were reasons made. And now, of course, we've seen statements from very high-ranking officials of creating a so-called Gaza humanitarian city. Keep using this word humanitarian being thrown around as if you use the word suddenly, therefore it is. That is an idea to apparently move 500,000 people into a cage within a cage without, all the requirements of water, food, sanitation, and not allow them to leave. So there's so many things wrong with it. I always promise myself, Sean, I'll never get to the point of saying, there's just no words because that makes this whole thing redundant. But to see a humanitarian aid system try to be sidelined, to see, to talk to those elderly people who are in tears. I mean, I met a little boy who literally got given money by his dad to go and buy food, this little 13-year-old guy. And that was the money the family had to buy bread, and Gaza and Palestinians know, they know that you buy bread and it'll fill your stomach, but it doesn't prevent malnutrition. And he
Hmm.
saw the degradation of his mum. He saw how unwell she was getting. He went out onto the street and there was just a flood of people heading south to one of these sites. And he obviously thought, this is my moment. This is the moment I go as a 13-year-old kid. I don't come back with bread. I come back with a box of food. Same story I heard time and again. He went there was shooting, there was a quadcopter, he ran, a shell from a tank was shot, that ripped through this little boy, Abed al-Rahman, a 13-year-old kid, ripped through his stomach. So when I saw him, I'll never forget this little boy because he wanted to sit up. He wanted to tell his story because he wanted to get medical evacuation, but he wanted to tell his story too. He's 13, he's sitting up through immense pain, telling his story. His dad's in tears because little boy's almost apologizing to his dad, just saying, I just wanted to get food for the family. And his dad's in tears because this is what happened to his son when his son tried to help the family. And yeah, the day I left Gaza, I was there for 2 weeks last time. The day I left, that boy died. And that he died family being starved and then shot at while you're trying to scramble for survival. And like all these horrific stories, it's simply no longer unique. It's heartbreaking. It's just not unique.
It's 5 times that you've been to Gaza now. Where do you find the wherewithal to keep going back and bear witness to this time and time again? Because I can't imagine. I've never been there. I see it on my phone every day, as many people in the West do. For you to return several times and be a first-hand witness to what's going on there, where do you find the energy and the stability to do that? And what does it do to you when you come back?
I think where you find it is easy in a way. It's through Palestinians. So part of my job is privilege. Part of it is jarring and scarring and seeing and hearing and smelling the things you see. But equally, because of, say, UNICEF's work, when I was last in Gaza, I was at a nutrition site where you're seeing mums and grandmums receiving nutritional food. You're seeing that look on a mother, So I've seen the look on a 5-year-old girl going to school for the first time. You see the look on a mum when her child's being vaccinated. Those things motivate and inspire. But also in Gaza, because I've been there so many times, I get to know families. So I meet these families. They're incredible. So I get to meet Palestinians. And these aren't, I know these sound like Lonely Planet book cliches. They're not. They're perseverance. I mean, it's a population with a remarkably high, one of the world's highest literacy rates. And there's something privileged about hearing those stories, seeing how stoic and proud those people are and generous with their time. I sit with mums all the time who've just seen something horrific happen to their child, and they are generous and gracious with their time. So I feel an immense responsibility to try and tell those stories. I sat with a family not long ago, and a fourth-year English literature student. I just love the way they capture things. She said to me, James, it's just so humiliating to starve. They're her words, So those people, I've created friendships. I feel an immense responsibility because they don't have an outlet. They say horrific things, Sean. I mean, I will talk to them all the time. I've got kids in their 20s, and my kids are very aware of this. And I explain to people I meet, look, you understand that there is an outpouring of empathy and rage around the world. It is just matched by impunity for a select few, but it really is there. And they say, look, we do understand that. We know people care, but we also know that international humanitarian law doesn't apply to us to say these kind of things. So I get my inspiration from what UNICEF does on the ground, and I get it from those people who are generous enough with their time. And for me, look, it's a work in progress. It's never straightforward, but there are many levels of guilt with Gaza. So even thinking about how do I respond to the things I've seen feels indulgent because, right now there's a 10-year-old girl in Gaza who has not been allowed to leave for 640 days, who will go to bed again tonight, and her mum, it was very unsettling for me, Sean, to see that particularly in children around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, when those children a year and a half ago looked in their parents' eyes and realized their mum or dad could no longer protect them. That is a horrifying thing for a kid, and also for a parent to realize, I've lost the ability to protect you. As parents said to me last year when there were ceasefires, all the discussion, like they were praying that would happen, saying, if that happens, I can promise my little boy that he'll wake up in this tent tomorrow morning. I can't promise that. So, so those things, as I say, it feels indulgent on that front. There's a lot of guilt in Gaza. There's guilt in leaving. There's guilt in having a square meal. There's guilt in putting a pillow over my head at 1 o'clock in the morning because I just need to sleep for 3 hours because there's a bombardment outside. So there's lots of different things that take a moment to kind of decipher, if you will.
Where do you think the disconnect is between what's happening on the ground and how governments, societies respond and understand what's happening in Gaza? Like, I mean, we just said there, you see it firsthand. A lot of people see it on their phones. You hear it in the media, but there seems to be a disconnect. Like we're 2 years in now, and there's still this debate over whether, in the UK, a question of, well, we're not necessarily giving F-35 parts to the Israeli government, or if it's the United States with the president proposing himself a hotel in Gaza. At what point do you think something shifts in the political psyche or the media psyche that we start to listen and understand what's happening?
I don't know. There's been so many instances, and you're right to point to, to member states. On one hand, I don't even talk about principles anymore in interviews because I see people's eyes kind of gloss over. But you're absolutely right. If a member state is aware that another member state is committing grave violations against children, then any support, not just military, but any diplomatic, any financial support at all, they bear responsibility. It should concern all of us, particularly people of my generation who've been fortunate enough that, a rules-based order, whatever that looked like, has been generous to generations of people in terms of some level of stability. The idea that that's being so easily discarded is very, very disconcerting. So where does it, where right now does it stop? I don't know. Today, literally, as you and I first met, Sean, I was kind of a little bit thrown because there's a UNICEF-supported nutrition centre in Derry-Bulla in the Middle Zone that was hit by an airstrike a couple of hours before you and I started talking. That's it's mums who are fighting to keep their children alive because of absolute factual, enforced, stated deprivation of food, go to a nutrition centre, and then it's hit by an airstrike. And from what we see at the moment, at least 8 children have been killed. I spoke to a colleague on the ground who spoke to a mum, so this is very, very clear. Her 18-year-old son, she was holding her 18-month, holding her 18-month son's shoe, and he'd just been killed. And she said he spoke his first words that morning. So he spoke his first words that morning. That thing, she dressed him up because they're off to a nutrition centre to get some food. And whilst they're waiting for that nutrition centre to open, there's an airstrike. Now, to me, I'm like, come on, if anything changes the game, surely these photos now. And yet, we've had these horrific moments. We've had 17,000 children reportedly killed. It's a girl or boy killed every single hour since the horrors of October 7th. Every single hour. Now, I don't know, do the maths. That's 168 kids in a week. If 168 kids were killed in the UK in a week, I mean, this would just dominate. And that's every week for almost 2 years now. So I no longer know what is the benchmark, and I think Palestinians don't either. And that I find that horrifying.
How difficult is it as someone who works for an organization like the UN or UNICEF to be there, to bear witness to this, and to remain politically impartial? I mean, we were talking off air there earlier on about the BBC, about duty of reporting to citizens of other countries of what's happening in zones like Gaza. But to be on the ground somewhere like that and to see these things happening in real time, and talking about Derabala there a second ago, how does one remain neutral when talking about that or bearing witness to that?
I think the neutrality is straightforward because it's at the heart of what we do, and because I have a front row seat to so many horrific things happening to kids, then all you need to do is share it in black and white. What's been difficult and what's been, honestly, mate, to be honest, frustrating is how many times, it's good to be asked tough questions always, but to be quoted, lines that are so demonstrably false, but they're given credibility because they come from from a particular source, because they come from Israel in this case. That's really frustrating because you cannot in any realm starve a population. You can't, these right beyond. So that part's very frustrating. I'm very frustrated for Palestinians on the ground who just see their rights being blown up literally day in, day out. I mean, if you look at beyond what's happening to children in terms of the air attacks, and again the lines that no civilians are targeted. I mean, this would be laughable or ludicrous. In the same way that having the Gaza Humanitarian Fund having one site meant to serving 2.2 million people, and having people having to walk through a militarized zone, and when they are shot, the justification being, well, it's a militarized zone. I mean, if that wasn't the most ludicrous, lethal catch-22, it would be laughable. So. Yeah, there is an immense frustration in continually having to combat that kind of narrative, particularly because the longer it goes on, the more people claim that they're not sure about what's going on. Whereas it is, as you rightly said, if you see it on our phones, we've never seen something go for such a long time in 4D. We are so patently aware of it.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, as well, you've ministers in the Israeli government like Smotrich, Ben Gvir. There was that, I can't remember which one it was, it might have been someone else even, that had said previously there are no innocents in Gaza. There's another from Smotrich, which it's what was it? The goal is to completely destroy Gaza, like turn it into just wipe it out entirely. And this is the rhetoric of the government that's the government that is enforcing military actions in Gaza. And you have organizations like UNICEF, or organizations like the Red Crescent or the Red Cross or whoever it might be. I mean, in the case of the Red Crescent, several times being directly targeted by the IDF, it's just, it seems to be a terrifying time for truth and objectivity. When you see, as you said, you see these things happening on your phone, or you see these things happening on the ground, but you also see it in the news of what is being said by the government of that country. You see it in the arrest warrants from the ICC, but yet the most powerful government in the world will still host the president of that country, despite the fact that there's an arrest warrant out for him. Does it feel hopeless when you work for someone like UNICEF, when you've got this hypocrisy at the highest levels of state and political acting?
For me, no, because I often asked on hope, Sean, and because Gazans, Palestinians hold on to it, so it doesn't feel like mine to discard. And again, because I have that fortunate role that when I go to places, or I go to Sudan, or if I go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, I actually still see that impact of the work. But your point's a really good one. And again, in terms of, there's a statement, I think it came from JFK, sincerity is subject to proof. And, you hear all these statements of, no civilian casualties, all the statements you made, and yet the reality on the ground is very, very clear. We see statements that were made after October 7 around the intent. We see those statements made now. So for me, I can't. Do I get enraged and angry? Yes. I don't think despair, hopelessness is mine to share. I don't think I should allow myself that. And I don't think that's fair to pass that for a generation. As I say, I've got two kids in their early 20s and my youngest is 17. I really worry for that generation, because those kids who are aware, they are aware years ago of a mental health crisis, aware that this umbrella of a climate crisis, and they have a front row seat to this level of hypocrisy. And that is not something I think that young people in their 20s should be enduring all the time, because where is that role? Where is their source? I still do think it exists. I still think that voice of young people, I still think that sense of protest, that sense of political discourse and political political protest is really, really important. And I certainly know that Palestinians, because they are so politically aware, they see that, they note that. Yes, they know that international humanitarian law, as they say, doesn't apply. But my goodness, they see when they see young people out on the street. So I don't think that anyone can shrug their shoulders and say it's too much. But yours is a generation that I think it's brutally unfair, that level of political hypocrisy alongside, the umbrella issue of a climate crisis.
Hmm. Just finally, the main thrust of your work is working with the children in these conflict zones. Is there any theme or recurring um, demand of the children of Gaza for people in the West? Like, what are you hearing them say about what we should be doing, what the world in general should be doing when it comes to their situation?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think there's so much, again, the fog of war. Even if you just talk about their access to food, it's food, but now it's water. It used to be food, but now you can't live without water for a matter of days. People have learned they can live without food for a week or two abhorrently. But even if you go for the narrative that all this food is being looted and taken, which is ludicrous, has no evidence base, has no logic based on a numerical base, but Water goes from a source to a recipient, and yet we have a complete blockade on water right now, which is utterly lethal. So for children right now, it's access to water. But because Palestinians have held on to an education rate through all the crises over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that is the hope. That is where the hope is. I was really surprised when I stayed in Gaza City recently to see how much of the infrastructure is still there, to be told by people that day one of the ceasefire, they're having cake and cappuccinos. It's not a cliche, Sean. The way they do respond is because they've been through crises before. It's built into their DNA. It's built into their education rate. It's also built into their systems, their logistics. So if finally there is a sustained level of peace, then I have no doubt that Palestinians bounce back because they've done it before. But right now, to answer your question, right now, beyond every other level, mate, they need to stop being bombed. As we just saw several hours ago, mums trying to help their children, fight off malnutrition, being bombed while they wait for food. It's just another benchmark of depravity that has been smashed through.
James Elder, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Sean.